I would call upon Lukasz Aleksandrowicz, who is going to give a special introduction to Planetary Health on behalf of Wellcome Trust. Lukasz, please.
Hello, thank you, Bharati. Good morning, everybody. I'm Lukasz Aleksandrowicz. I'm a portfolio manager for the Our Planet, Our Health program at Wellcome. And as Bharati mentioned, this presentation was meant to originally be delivered by my colleague Modi Mwatsama, who is our science lead for food systems and health, but she was unfortunately unable to be here this week, so I'm filling in on her behalf. And what I'm going to talk about today is briefly give you an overview of the emerging field of planetary health, why we at Wellcome think it's important, and how many of you in the room today play a crucial part in it. So the Our Planet, Our Health program at Wellcome is a funding team that focuses on the challenges of global environmental change and health. And our vision is a world in which the natural systems that support health are sustainable across generations, enabling health for all people. It's a lofty vision, and we see ourselves as aligned with and supporting a new emerging field called planetary health. And for anyone unfamiliar with it, it was a concept that was coined quite recently in 2015 with the publication of a commission on planetary health by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Lancet. And this is still very much a field that is developing and finding its footing and developing a framework. But the idea behind it is that we've made incredible gains in public health over the last century. Life expectancy has risen substantially in all countries, in some cases more than doubling since the start of the 1900s. Similarly, child mortality has dropped significantly, also across all countries of all socioeconomic levels. And the share of individuals living in absolute poverty has also dropped substantially in the last 100 years. And these are just a couple indicators of health and well-being, but by most accounts, life has markedly improved in the last century. But on the flip side of this, these advances in health have come at the cost of many natural Earth systems. So in our quest to improve standards of living, we've also released vast amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. We've extracted large amounts of natural resources. For example, in fisheries, in forests, in biodiversity loss, in quality topsoil. And the toll we've had on the natural environment has been so high, and the disruption to natural systems has been so widespread that some are proposing that we're now living in a new epoch, a new era in history called the Anthropocene. And this is defined by the deep mark that humanity has made on natural Earth systems. So this presents us with a global set of challenges, all of which either indirectly or directly impact on human health. And this is where our funding program comes in. So we very much focus on better understanding how these changes in global environmental change impact on health, how we can mitigate those changes or adapt to them. But it's not all doom and gloom, and it's important to focus on the opportunity in all of this. And the opportunity is one in which we can improve these natural systems and to safeguard health looking into the future. And while we need to be cognizant of the challenges that are coming ahead, we've recently developed our own positive vision of planetary health and what it means. And in essence, it's about ensuring that the Earth is a healthy home for humanity. So from this very large set of global challenges I've described, our program has tried to sort of narrow it down and define a bit more of a strategic goal. And we've whittled those down to a smaller but still large set of challenges. And those are cities, so how to create healthy and environmentally sustainable human settlements, food systems, understanding how to feed the world in a healthy and sustainable way, and climate change, so better understanding how to adapt to the impacts that we're expecting on human health from a changing climate. And we're all gathered here this week at the ANH Academy Week to discuss food systems, nutrition, health, and agriculture. And of course, all of these play a very important role in planetary health. So on one hand, diets are the leading risk factor globally for burden of disease. with all forms of malnutrition much too widespread globally. And now malnutrition is the single largest contributor to DALYs, to disability-adjusted life years, and global burden of disease worldwide for all countries at all stages of socioeconomic development. And on the other hand, food production also leads to environmental change and environmental degradation. So currently, food systems produce about a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions, use up about a third of all ice-free land globally, and extract about 70% of all water use. And not all foods are created equally. So in many cases, animal source foods have much higher environmental footprints than plant-based foods. And food production itself is also sensitive to environmental change. So not only does it create environmental change, but it's also impacted by the coming changes that it's brought about. So for example, we know that with climate change, with higher temperatures and increased CO2 concentrations, that crop yields will decrease, but also the nutritional quality of crops will also decrease in the absence of other interventions. So there's a huge imperative to fix global food systems and diets. And two great examples of efforts to address these issues have been two recent Lancet commissions on food, environment, and health. And the first one was the Eat Lancet Commission on Food in the Anthropocene. And it outlined an ideal diet that adheres to planetary boundaries for Earth systems, and that could also be healthy. And also the Lancet Global Syndemic on Obesity, Undernutrition, and Climate Change, which looked at the underpinning common mechanisms that are cause for all three of these challenges. So the Eat Lancet Planetary Health, or the Eat Lancet report proposed a planetary health reference diet. And this is a diet that meets nutritional requirements and that would stay within planetary health boundaries for natural systems. And it proposes that by 2050, global consumption of red meat and sugar will need to halve, and that global consumption of protective plant-based foods will need to double. And while it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy, for example, in some places, animal source foods will need to increase, and in places where there's no arable land to produce crops, this is still a good starting point, I think, for further refinement and to downscaling to different contexts and regions. However, the world is far, far away from meeting such an ideal diet. Intake of animal source foods are overshot in the majority of regions worldwide, and then intake of other nutrient-dense foods such as dairy, fish, veg, fruit, legumes, and nuts is insufficient in almost all regions as well, except with a few exceptions. And so looking at some of the other regions in more detail, the North American diet is a good illustration of a current average baseline diet that is rather unhealthy and unsustainable in the global north. So red meat consumption is about 600 times the levels where it should be, and intake of other recommended foods such as nuts, legumes, fruits, and veg are a tiny fraction of recommended intake. And alternatively, in a very different context, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, diets are quite monotonous. They rely heavily on starchy staples, and in these contexts, increased dietary diversity, including animal source foods, would be incredibly beneficial for nutrition. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us to do. Though, of course, as I mentioned, we envision planetary health to be a proactive, solutions-oriented science, and it's important not to despair. And as the head of our team, Howard Frumpkin, often shares these lessons on how to focus on solutions in the face of overwhelming global challenges. And these are to think about respecting limits, the natural environmental boundaries within which we live, plan for the long-term future, thinking long-term about changes that are coming and changes that your actions are making. Think in systems. Everything's connected, and a solution in one area often has inadvertent or positive benefits somewhere else in the chain. Generate and use evidence, and importantly, think about policy relevant questions that end users would want to think about and that would want to use the evidence that you're creating. Work with urgency, as if your house is on fire, and have hope and be optimistic about the possibilities. And so the Our Planet, Our Health program was funded in 2015, and we're just now coming to the end of our first 5-year phase, and we're very busy now thinking about our next 5-year strategy. So here I'm suggesting a few kind of areas that we've been discussing in the team in the last month or so to build into our next 5-year phase. And this is just direction of travel and to be confirmed. But I'm laying it out here because I'd love to get your comments and feedback over the next couple of days. So for our food system priority, thinking about an overall goal of reducing animal source foods intake in regions where it's overconsumed and increasing dietary diversity globally, with some specific research and action gaps in helping countries to develop dietary guidelines that include environmental considerations, plugging a giant data gap on what people eat and food environments and their food experiences across all countries. More action-oriented research, so better understanding different solutions for changing consumer behavior. And of course, efforts to make sure that the evidence we're producing is translated into action and policy. So as we're thinking through our next steps, as I mentioned, we'd love to get your feedback, and we'd very much value your thoughts and comments, both over the next couple of days while I'm here, but also feel free to get in touch via email with any ideas you have or ideas about opportunities and challenges we should be thinking about as a funder. So thank you very much.